Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast.
Good afternoon. My name is Callum Robertson and welcome to a very special show today. Today, it's quite a special show for a number of reasons. Firstly, first ever show with Teacher Talk Radio. But arguably, more importantly than my ego, there is a special guest joining me momentarily. She's Neve Sweeney, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the National Education Union, who'll be joining me to talk all things education policy and all things teacher related for the next hour and a bit. And in that time, we're going to be taking audience questions. We're going to be finding out what motivated Neve to get involved as a teacher with the NEU. And we're really going to be focusing on what makes the strike action that's coming up so important. Neve has I've got a notification saying she's joined the room now. Hello, Neve. Have you managed to call in? Technical issues aside, we've all managed to join. So let's kick off the show. Thank you so much for coming to join us today.
Absolute pleasure.
No, it's fantastic to have a speaker who's really quite senior in the National Education Union join us, especially with the recent news of the strikes that have happened. Being voted on, haven't happened yet. Obviously, they're in about 2 weeks' time. So I just wanted to kick off by handing the floor over to you. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background and how you got into teaching?
So I'm Neve Sweeney. I'm the current Deputy General Secretary, the first elected Deputy General Secretary of the National Education Union. I don't think it's a surprise to people that know me. I didn't ever really plan to be a teacher. I enjoyed school, probably a little bit more of the social side than the academic side, my sixth form teachers would probably say. And I went and studied history and politics at university, enjoyed that, and started my sort of career, I suppose, working in Dublin in small independent publishing companies after university, publishing political, non-fiction, fiction, poetry. And while I was there, we published one of the first adult literacy fiction ranges written purposely for adults learning to read. And it was fascinating. So we had really top authors, especially not adapting their work, but writing it for adults. And that really inspired me. And I went from there to train to be a voluntary literacy tutor in Dublin, and I loved it. And then it was quite a brave or mad decision at that point to leave that job. And I went to train to be a youth and community worker and spent a couple of years working in Dublin at the height of what was economic boom at that point, but working with homeless children and what we called at that point, unaccompanied minors. Now we'd probably call them trafficked children. And, you know, it was often the theme going through that part of my career, part of my work, was that education hadn't quite worked out for all of those people, that it hadn't been the experience that I'd had. And then I moved back to England and worked in Cambridgeshire for the probation service, working with offenders, medium risk offenders, on thinking skills, cognitive behaviour therapy, sometimes drama, getting them to think about problem solving skills. And I received my best careers advice at that point from somebody I was working with who said, I wish I'd learned all of this at school. And that was when I started thinking about how could I begin to work within the more formal education system. And I don't know if you can remember the early 2000s when there was money in education and jobs for support roles. I applied and got a job at my local FE college, working with young people who were the first in their families to stay on in post compulsory education at that point, mainly working with children from the travelling community, girls in particular, getting them opportunities, apprenticeships or BTECs. And they supported and trained me to carry out my PGCE, and that's how I started teaching.
Wonderful. And have you always taught in the state sector, or did you do any time in independent special schools or
No,
anything like
I've
that?
always taught in the state sector. I started in general FE colleges, then spent some quite significant time working in a secondary school in Cambridge with some sixth form work, but taught from year 9 upwards. I absolutely think anybody who works with young children, they are very courageous. I like the cut and thrust of working with teenagers. And then I worked in a sixth form college. So I finished off my teaching career working at Long Road Sixth Form College in Cambridge.
Fantastic. A school I know quite well. I grew up down the road in Peterborough.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, Cambridgeshire is so lucky to have a lot of teachers of your skill talking with who had alternative experiences and then decided to become teachers, which is a fascinating thing that sort of it's really taken off the career changes in the last sort of 20 odd years. Have you got any advice to anyone who would potentially wish to become a teacher who's currently in a career that they sort of are enjoying but not necessarily fulfilling all of their potential in?
Well, I think teaching is, it's an absolute privilege. It's an absolute privilege to be with young people when they are making decisions about their life choices, or, seeing them learn and grow and develop and understand things. But I don't think we can underestimate actually how hard it is. And when I've spoken to people changing careers or whilst at university saying that they're interested in teaching, I think it's really upon us to be honest with them about actually how difficult and how hard it can be. Because what I don't want people entering the career is to be disillusioned by it very quickly. So particularly during the Gove years, I remember having a conversation with somebody about wanting to become an English teacher, and I asked them why. And she said it's because she was passionate about her subject. And I thought, you're going to need more than that. You're going to need more than passion about a subject. You're going to need to think about how you can engage with children and young people to share that passion. But it absolutely is the best career. I miss being in the classroom, and I miss that engagement. And there's nothing better than seeing people that you might have taught 10, 15 years ago going on to become teachers themselves, or going on to work in nursing and midwifery and social work, and amazing, amazing young people that they've turned out to be.
Absolutely. I've keep in contact with some of my teachers to this day, and I remember messaging one of them when I qualified as a teacher, and she was surprised to say the least. But actually, it's that thing of you've got sort of that shared experience, and I can honestly say for me, it's the one thing, the one job I've ever had in my life where I get up every morning, even when you're feeling a bit under the weather, even when you're feeling a bit down, and actually you still want to do your job. And those kids at the end of it and their outcomes are so important to all of us.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, you obviously didn't just stay in the classroom, you did some other stuff as well. So when doing some research for the show, discovered you're a local councillor. How do you find juggling being a local councillor with, I assume, being a teacher to start with and being a union official?
Well, it's not easy, but I think they're all connected. I mean, I became a councillor, or I stood to be a councillor. I didn't ever expect to win, but I became a sort of a local activist. Of Cambridge is known throughout the world as being for education. It's known for its development of amazing IT and problem solving. And yet, if I walk across the city, and it's not a large city, it's really a town. If I walk across the city, there's huge deprivation, and there is a 10-year difference in life expectancy from one ward to the other. And I worked in a secondary school in the city centre, and we did a field trip out looking at accessibility for people with visual impairments with some of our social care students. And I took them into the market square and asked them what they knew about the city that they were from, that their parents were from. And I asked them about the buildings, and out of 10 students, only one had ever been inside one of the university buildings. And that made me, we've got such amazing things happening in our city, but it's so inaccessible for so many of our young people. So I worked really hard, and I've got a great team in my ward of political activism, of making our outdoor spaces more accessible, about making our city cleaner, and making it safer for young people. And I did exactly the same in my role as a union official or a union rep, of talking to people and taking time to listen. And it meant a lot of door knocking, a lot of walking around the streets and getting to know my local area. But it was always really important to me that I stood in the area that I lived in, that I heard and represented those people. I'm not standing again in May, and whilst I think about that will give me some of my evenings back and I won't have to sit in council meetings anymore, I will miss that, because we have absolutely, as the leading group in the city, transformed so many people's lives and worked really hard over lockdown to make sure that we do have a reputation for street sleeping in Cambridge, and we worked really hard to ensure that anybody who wanted a bed could have a bed, that we've got great sustainable food projects all around the city for people that are struggling in the cost of living crisis, and how we can respond to that. So I see it all interlinking, but I became active in politics because of my trade union work, as opposed to using my politics to increase my trade union activity.
No, absolutely, and there is a massive overlap, particularly in the labour movement, about trade unionism and actually representation of people in the workplace. And I find local politics fascinating, but I'm usually in a minority of one there. But that's just me. So obviously we've chatted about being a local councillor, getting your evenings back, but actually a union official. Now, the union, the NEU, has been in the news a fair bit in the last couple of days. I think it's fair to say. How on earth did you end up involved in the union?
Well, I've always been a member of a union wherever I've worked, and that's because my mum was always quite active, was very active in the trade union. We're a trade union family, really. I've got relatives who were presidents and officials in trade unions around the world. So it was always something that was important to me, and having always worked, mainly predominantly in the public sector, trade union activism was there. And I suppose, like many people, I think, who ended up becoming more active in their trade union role, something at work happened to me, and I felt I was treated unjustly, and I was very upset, and I remember going home and crying.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
That had heard that I'd been treated badly at work, and they were my rep, and they supported me to decide what I wanted to do about my treatment, and absolutely helped build up my confidence again of being in the workplace. And as they are a good rep, they then said, well, how do you fancy getting involved? And so I did, and very quickly ended up at our national conference, and was just absolutely blown away by the democracy of it all, of that me as a member from a college in Cambridge that had never really been active in the union before could suddenly have a voice that could make changes to education that could benefit my colleagues. At that first conference, I learnt so much. I think my family think I'm a bit odd that, it was the Easter holidays. I went away. We work in a really high pressure environment. And then it comes to our holidays and we go and we sit in a room with another 1,000 teachers and talk about education for a couple of days. But it really empowered me of thinking, actually, if we're going to ensure that young people get the best education, children get the best education that they're entitled to. Being active and involved in that change is really important. So I got involved at a national stage quite early, and then worked with my local district and branch and took on some of those organising roles of just making sure that meetings were accessible to people, that we putting on training for other teachers and support staff in the area, because that's part of the thing that we know. I do look back on those halcyon days in the early 2000s when there was money in education and I was able to go on CPD. That doesn't happen so much anymore, and so much of that can be done through the organising of a good trade union group locally. And we're seeing that today all over the country. There are NEU members organising support for each other in CPD and development sessions today.
Fantastic. And it's one of the great things about the unions. We were in our union meeting with work last week, and the ideas that we're bouncing off each other. Now, we're lucky in my school to have a very supportive senior leadership, and it's not a combative relationship that you see in a lot of schools. But obviously, that's not always the case. How would you recommend people get involved in the union if they're in a school where actually there is a hostility towards unions?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult, and I think we see it sometimes in the press, and we've seen it sometimes in the news over the last couple of months about people separating the unions from working people. So you hear people say union leaders. What are union leaders doing? What's the union doing? Well, of course, the union is the workforce. It is the teachers in the school, and I don't believe that any head teacher or senior leadership team would want to be combative or ignore what their workforce is saying to them. And I think it's really important that we you were talking about your workplace as being very supportive. Teachers and workers talk to each other. So if you know that there's a supportive workplace down the road and they're enabling people to do really simple things to reduce their workload, like decide on their own marking policy, or do their marking at home, do their PPA at home, have time off to be able to see their own child's nativity play, or take their child to school one day a week. If you're hearing about that good practice, you can collectivise as a group at work and take that to your leadership team and say, hold on, why can't we do those things? Surely we can work together to make the environment more pleasant and better for everybody to be in. Because if you are happy in your workplace, you stay longer, you commit to the role, you commit to your school community, and it makes everything easier for everybody to do. I don't see being a trade unionist as being someone who's always having arguments. It is about looking for solutions and ideas and how we make the situation that we're all working in much better for everybody, because the idea is, we want education to be a good experience for people working in it as well as young people.
I see. And on the subject of ideas, you are running for General Secretary of the National Education Union.
I am.
I believe it is the first election it's had since the merger. Tell me about your plans, your campaign. What's your ambition? What's your dream for the NEU?
Well, my dream for the NEU is, we're only 5 years old, and it's been a whirlwind of 5 years. I don't think any of us could have predicted when on, the 1st of September 2018, we sat down in a meeting room and it became the National Education Union, that we would have played such a pivotal role in changing the way that education has worked, that, teachers moving their practice online overnight and how we supported each other as union groups to do that. I don't think, when we wrote our rule book, I remember sitting in a room just off Northumberland Avenue, and we were talking about our rule book and that meetings should take place in person. We should have meetings in person because that helps build community and strength and collectivism. And I remember saying, what about Skype? What about Skype? Could we think about using Skype as a? And everyone went, no. And you think now, Skype has completely disappeared. Who uses it? But over the pandemic, we absolutely changed the way that we organised our groups, how we communicated with each other. And being part of a district meeting where we were talking about sharing ideas of how to engage young people online, from teenagers to year 2 and 3. How do you engage children online to help provide education during a pandemic? We had nearly 200 members on that meeting. We might have a meeting in person and there might be 12 people turn up. So I really want to think about how we build and grow on everything that we've innovated. We've been an innovative trade union, and I think we can really continue to do that. We have to do those things to be heard, that we are the voice of the profession, and that we're looking to save the profession, because I really fear that with more cuts coming the way, that the government sees an easy line or an easy win is to replace a teacher with an instructor, someone reading something off an AI or a computer, and lots of interaction. And actually, we know as a profession that it's the relationships that we have with children and young people that make that education stick and make support children to succeed. So we really have to think about making sure that politicians are listening to us and that we are giving solutions. And there are easy things that could be done to reduce teacher workload. Now, there's two things the union can do on that. Is about making sure that our policies are everything that we're doing reflects the issues that our members are saying they have in the workplace, and that we are listening to them. But we also have to make sure that the government is doing their job. And if they're not, then we will talk to every other political party and every other group to do that. And I think the easy wins are pausing Ofsted inspection and reducing workload that way, ending the formal grading, the 1, 2, 3, 4 or the outstanding, the labelling of schools and end league tables. Now that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have any sort of accountability, but that immediately takes pressure off a workforce that are, absolutely a point of desperation. I don't think we can underestimate the fact that ASCL have carried out an indicative ballot about strike action and are considering strike action, and the NEHT just missed their thresholds and are talking about reballoting. I don't think the government can underestimate that says the profession is in real danger and it is absolutely time to act. And the NEU will be at the fore of that. And I want to ensure that I'm the leader that does that.
So what policies, you mentioned obviously reforming or stopping Ofsted inspections. How does that work potentially for some of the schools and there are some schools out there that are failing their students?
Well, I'm not saying no inspection at all. I think it's really important that Ofsted are over, or whoever it would be looking at safety. We know that we've got really poor building standards, that is failing our children and young people, and that there are serious safeguarding inspections that need to take place. But we also know that Ofsted have said this themselves. Of course, Amanda Spielman said this in her annual report, that workload issues are causing an exodus of teachers. And we know in the profession that workload is often driven by inspection. We also know that labelling a school and labelling a community doesn't always bring around improvement. What it does is means that you're more likely to have a change of leadership, you're more likely to have a change of staff, high staff turnover, and that doesn't do well for children. And then you often see children churn in a school, and that doesn't help a community recover. We need to ensure that teachers and school leaders have really got autonomy about how they teach and what they teach, and reclaiming the curriculum so that they can provide, there's so much talk about catch up at the moment, isn't there, and catching up from COVID, but so much of that is being pushed towards English and maths, and I'm not saying that isn't important. But if you're missing PE or you're missing drama or play to catch up in those subjects, you actually really suck the joy out of learning for so many young people that have got difficult lives. So, we need to see action on curriculum reform and looking at what it is we are teaching our young people, and is it fit for a 21st century? This government talks about high skill, high wage economy, but it's not investing in children and young people. And we need to also ensure that we are supporting all of our members to organise in their workplace, and giving members a voice within that democratic organisation. I think over the last couple of weeks, members have recognised that they have a voice, that they have a vote, that they can take part in action to make things better. But so many of our members actually just consume our union and don't recognise that they've got a voice. And I think we have to really look at why members don't engage, why members go to one meeting and don't go back. And I have experience of that, of walking into a trade union room that, is in somebody else's school. I'm not said, nobody says hello to me, nobody asks me who I am. And we have to make sure that we are a welcoming organisation that ensures that everybody feels that they've got a voice. We absolutely have to be the place where you can safely debate and safely exchange views and then come to a common goal or conclusion. But we shouldn't be shutting people out because they come from a different experience or a different background, or we don't agree with them initially.
And talking different experiences and different backgrounds, one of the things that I noticed, particularly in the union meeting I was in earlier this week, there are a lot of ECTs and early career teachers there. And that's fantastic that we've got younger people and people newer to the profession engaging with the unions. However, the fear that I saw, and I saw it on Facebook NEU groups as well, is that there's no general strike fund. What is the NEU's approach to that, and why wasn't there one established in the run-up to this strike action?
Good question. Well, according to our rule book, and of course, I would say as a democratic organisation, it's our conference every year that agrees our rules and decides to make rule changes. So for national action, we don't have a strike fund. However, each district has set up their own hardship fund and will be able to support members who are in financial hardship for taking action. I absolutely understand there is that huge fear of losing pay, and when you are already working more unpaid overtime than any other profession and earning, when you calculate your hours as an early career teacher, earning just, sometimes just above the minimum wage, that the idea of sacrificing your wage for strike action is something that's really difficult to do. We need to be really clear to members that how that deduction is made. So it's, it's one over 365. It's not it's not a day's pay. It's calculated in a different way. We need to look and support members to recognise that if you take strike action on the 1st of February, that will probably come out of your February wages, but later action wouldn't come out of until your March wages. So it's unlikely, and we've looked significantly, and our executive took a lot of time to really consider that if we are asking our members to take national strike action to save education, that we are asking them to take, we've announced 7 days of action, but that will be 4 days of action for each member. And we looked at the spread of that, and we looked at that specifically, and our executive specifically talked about the impact on, childcare costs, on the idea that somebody might not be earning their wages that day, but we're expecting them to drive into a rally or get a train to a rally, and how much that would cost them. So districts are absolutely aware of that and will have set up their own hardship funds. I will always say to any member, you shouldn't be in financial difficulty because of your trade union activity. So speak to your local district. And if you can't do that, or you don't have a contact, then please get in touch with me and I'll make sure that you're speaking to the right person. We also have a trust fund, which is a charity run alongside our union. And so members put in contributions to the trust fund regularly as part of their subs. And that has helped so many of our members over the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. I met a supply teacher a number of months ago. She had lost her job. She'd been furloughed and lost her job in the independent sector as a result of COVID, and was now working as a supply teacher. And her exact words for me were, "The NEU Trust Fund saved my life." So we don't underestimate the impact that the cost of living crisis or strike action is having on people, and we absolutely have support out there, and I urge members to come forward if they need help.
No, fantastic. And actually, that's a message that I think a lot of early career teachers will be very relieved to hear. Just because I think it's one of those things where if you're more established, if you have savings, if you're, for example, have managed to survive an entire career, and in your 60s, you're quite likely to be mortgage free, so won't necessarily understand the fears that a lot of younger teachers.
No, absolutely. And I think, you mentioned about Peterborough. I think particularly in areas where we've seen it in the press, and we absolutely, so many of our members really do struggle. And yes, the starting salary of a teacher sounds like a large wage. And when you're a student, you think, wow, that's amazing. And then you realise that you have to pay rent, you pay your student loan back, you're travelling to work. Members are contacting us regularly saying that they're struggling to fill their cars on the 4th week of the month, that they're reliant on parents to pay food bills or for childcare. And there is, there's significant outgoings, particularly early on in your career. So we do recognise that, but that's why this strike action is really important, because if those early career teachers don't stay in teaching, the impact for generations to come will be felt. And it's just such a waste because, as we said before, teaching is an amazing career. It's absolutely fantastic. We want people to join us. We want new graduates to come in, and we want them to stay, because that's what makes children's experience of education better.
General Secretary. We've got a good question for East Midlands members. The first 3 strike days are on a Wednesday. Some local members have raised concern about the same day being targeted each time. Strikes are meant to be deliberately disruptive, but is putting them all on the same day a good idea?
We have tried to move them around, and so some, I think some are definitely on Tuesdays, and then there's a Wednesday, Thursday at the end. That, I would say, that's unfortunate. It is unfortunate, but it is supposed to be disruptive. No member put that tick in that box to vote for strike action because they wanted to cause disruption. They put the tick in the box because they are at the absolute end of their tether. We don't want to take strike action. We want the government to come up with a solution. And if you think back, we did an indicative ballot of our members in the autumn term, and 80% of our members ticked a box saying that they were prepared to take strike action, that they wanted to have a formal ballot. And we've done that formal ballot now. That was over 4 months ago. So the government knew 4 months ago that nearly 90% of our members were saying they were having enough and that something needed to be done. The motion, the conference motion that came from our membership to our national conference last April was talking about moving towards a national ballot of strike action. So almost a year ago, the government knew. We've written to 4 secretaries of state saying this is serious. Now, if the government were taking it seriously, would we have had 4 secretaries of state in 8 months? Would they maybe have stuck with the same person and really sat down and negotiated with us? Now, I go into the Department of Education regularly, and I'm regularly talking to them about workload solutions and what we can do. But I had a meeting in my calendar, in my diary, to talk about workload reduction for teachers. I had it in my diary since before Christmas, and it was due to happen on Wednesday, and that was cancelled on Tuesday. Now, I want the government to seriously sit down the table, and our General Secretary, Mary Balstead, sat in 6 hours of negotiations or talks on Friday. But I don't think they seriously understand the difficulty that they are in. A quarter of teachers leaves the profession within 2 years. 13% of teachers that qualified in 2019 have already walked away. And and everybody listening to this, who's, whether they're a teacher or a parent, a grandparent or a retired teacher, that you'll have been invited into a Meet the New Teacher event, or you'll know a GCSE class that's had 7 or 8 different teachers for maths, science, or geography. We've got a real crisis in education here. The government need to sit down and talk to us. And because, the other thing is that they're saying about minimum service levels, absolutely. Young people's education, if these strike days go ahead, young people's education is going to be disrupted. Children's education will be disrupted. And unfortunately, parents' lives will be disrupted too. But if we had minimum service levels where you could guarantee that a child was being taught by a teacher who was qualified in their subject, that was committed and able to commit long term to the career, that we didn't have the largest class sizes in Europe and they are growing, that's the sort of thing that the government need to seriously think about. It's on their watch that our education system has creaked and is in real jeopardy. And we also know that, I was reading about a school in Cumbria recently that's had to close and move its classes online and into other schools in the surrounding areas because their building has been condemned. This is how serious it is. And we can talk about it being the best career going, it absolutely is. If you're going into work day after day, working in those difficult conditions, it's not, it absolutely is having a negative impact on our teachers' working lives.
No, that's a very, very strong set of points there. We think about the NEU and sort of the media is very happy to pit unions against parents, etc. But the evidence from a poll taken in the Daily Mirror last week is that 73% of voters support the strike action. What would you say to the media who are currently lambasting unions for taking strike action?
Well, it is what I've said. Nobody takes that action as a last resort, and it's only because we are a union of active members where, I speak to members. I speak to members of the union every day, and they tell me those stories, and so it's my responsibility to pass those stories on to journalists. And I've done a lot of media work in the last week, and it was absolutely evident on the faces and in the voices of those journalists that they understand it because they hear those stories too. And so when you do a phone in on a local radio station, you have most people ringing in saying, my son's doing their GCSE chemistry this year. They've not got a chemistry teacher. I know a friend of mine's a physics teacher and his year 11s ask him if he's coming back next week every Friday evening because, they've had so many. We know that dance classes being taught by a long series of supply teachers doing their best, but not in a dance hall or a drama studio, in a classroom because they're not qualified in the subject. And parents hear this and know this, and they recognise how hard teachers work. They know that also because of lockdown. So many of them, with the support of their school, absolutely recognised how difficult it is to entertain and get a young person, a child without the right equipment or without the right knowledge to support somebody in their learning. So parents have been hugely supportive. And I think whenever we are organising a picket line or a rally, we have to make sure that we're including parents and parental support on that as well. So, we're encouraging districts to make sure that they've got some support for children and looking about making your picket line or banner making session as inclusive as possible, because children deserve better and parents know that their children deserve better, and that's why we're taking this action.
Fantastic. So you have mentioned a couple of times subject specialism. Now, I'm one of a number of teachers who now teaches very happily in a subject that I wasn't originally trained in. I now teach law, politics, and RA. I originally trained as a history teacher. What would you say is the danger of having a lot of subjects taught by non-specialists?
Well, I did something similar to you, actually. I sort of morphed and grew and developed my subject, over my career. And the thing about that is about you being in control about it, isn't it? And about how much of your workload changes. So I was a health and social care teacher, and then because of my background working in probation, I actually took on some new teaching in criminology. But I was able to manage that, of how much of my timetable became the new subject. I've also taught out of my subject area completely, and I taught some anatomy and physiology, which isn't my area. And I'm honest with you, it made me ill. It nearly drove me out of the profession completely, and it wasn't a good experience for the children that I was teaching. Now, they didn't necessarily know that I'm a good actress. They didn't necessarily know that I wasn't a specialist in my subject. but they weren't getting the best. And I think if you are teaching more than 25% of your curriculum in an area that you've not studied since you were at school, or you haven't got an A-level or a part of your degree qualification in, then it absolutely is really difficult, because you're spending all of your time over planning, being overcritical, making sure that you're one step ahead, and over anticipating what questions you might get in the classroom. And of course, you don't always have the answers. And that is really difficult on top of everything else that you're doing as a teacher. So absolutely, with support and with CPD and with your own professional development hat on, you can diversify and change. You know, we know teachers move from early years to teaching in secondary, or from secondary to teaching in primary, but that has to be done where you are in control about it and make those decisions yourself. When you're constantly teaching out of your subject, and we've seen this in some areas where you can't recruit a history teacher, so you employ a humanities teacher or a geography teacher, and you've got them teaching history, it's really difficult for you to do over a long period of time. And it means that the experience that the children are getting is not always the best. So I know from a post-16 perspective, talking to applied science teachers in sixth form college, that they recognise that when children come in with a GCSE science and they've not been taught physics by a physics specialist, that there are gaps in their knowledge. So it's not good for children, it's not good for results, and it's not good for skills in the future. And it's really not good if you're doing it and it's making you sick.
Absolutely. I say when I did it, I voluntarily, when I applied for a new job, wanted to take on a new experience, so wanted to take on new subjects. But I imagine I am probably in a minority of people who, and changing from history to, say, law or politics is not the biggest jump, especially with my degree being law. But actually, part of this problem with lack of subject specialists is recruitment and retention crisis. How do we as a profession solve the fact that not enough people want to become teachers, and of those who do make the plunge, become teachers from very good teachers, are driven out of the profession? How do we tackle that?
Well, I mean, that's what, is it our job to tackle it? Part of it is, and I think we can do that in our workplaces by addressing our own workload and collectivising and making decisions and having discussions with our leaders about what we can do to make our own workplaces healthier for our members and our staff members to work in. So, when I talk to members, and, I don't think anybody goes into teaching thinking that they're not going to be busy, that it's not going to be a full day, that they're not going to work hard. I would always be very willing to spend every hour of my day planning exciting lessons, but that wasn't always the case. I actually had to spend lots of my time doing things that weren't exciting or didn't have impact on the teaching and learning or the experience of the children that I was working with. So we have to, in our workplaces, get together and start talking to each other and saying to our leaders, there are so many hours in the day. You want me to do this, you want me to do this. Which one is more important? Which ones can I not do? Because we shouldn't have members or teachers and leaders and support staff working above their contracted hours. We know that support staff often work during their lunch break. They cover things, they stay way beyond the school day. We have teachers and leaders coming in before school and staying after school, but then going home and doing another 2 or 3 hours at the end of a day. So we have to ensure that our members are empowered. And as a union leader, I can give members skills, I can give them support, I can give them the resources to be able to start having those conversations in their own workplaces to make things better. But the government has got a huge responsibility here, because young people see that their teachers are exhausted. So if you're a young person and you see that your teachers are exhausted, why would you become a teacher? And the government has got to look at, why is it missing its recruitment targets, not just in the traditional shortage subjects, but now in every subject and in primary? Why is it doing that? And part of the reason it's doing that is because of the graduate pay. You can, if you think about teachers, some of them have postgraduate degrees, so a 2-degree profession, and teachers know that, or graduates know, that they can get a job working in their subject area maybe working, in IT or in healthcare professions and in hospitality, in all sorts of graduate areas, in law, and work fewer hours and be paid more. And of course, now we are seeing that the graduate work market is much more flexible, so people can work from home and have much more, other benefits. And teaching has not kept up with that. So the government has got to think, what is it doing? What is it doing that's putting people off? And I think people are put off by the scrutiny that teachers are put under, that one Ofsted inspection or one poor exam results can end your career and label a school. Young people know that, and graduates know that. And so the government has got to really think about what it is doing to the profession and what it can do to solve it. And that the NEU is absolutely willing to sit down and come up with, we've got lots of ideas that we would share.
Fantastic. So obviously you've been quite critical of the government's approach to sort of recruiting teachers and workload. But actually, what about other aspects of the government education strategy? I think, like many teachers, I was surprised, let's say, when I read that Rishi Sunak was planning to bring in maths until 18. Now, that struck me as not necessarily a bad idea. It just struck me as completely irrelevant to the current needs of schools.
Well, you see, no education policy should be made by number 10, on the steps of a New Year speech because he's worried about his polls. That shouldn't be happening. I absolutely agree that maths should, our curriculum for many 16 to 18-year-olds is really narrow. But to just make that decision when we know 1 in 8 maths lessons in secondary schools is taught by a non-maths specialist is just bonkers. To know that they've missed the targets and recruiting maths teachers even when it reduced its own target is bonkers, which shows that there's no substance. And I think teachers and school leaders are just really fed up with government making decisions that have no substance. But also, if you look back on it, so the government is also making changes to our education system that will mean that staying on and having maths or numeracy as part of your curriculum is even harder. So they've cut the funding to functional skills that many students in post-16 education carried on doing maths. They are looking to reduce all of the BTECs and general applied qualifications, which will narrow the life choices of many young people, which means that they will only study 3 A levels or go to an apprenticeship where there is, a lack of places and funding. And they're also, they're looking at reducing the curriculum of the GCSE alternatives of level 1 and level 2 qualifications. So, none of it fits together. So it is, for the Prime Minister to make a decision like that, it's laughable, and it shows just how out of touch they are with young people's lives and with what society wants and needs. If you don't get a 4 in your GCSE maths and you want to stay on and remain to do or retake some of your GCSEs or do A levels or do an applied qualification, you might do some retakes. But a Sixth Form college or an FE college isn't necessarily funded properly for that. So there are so many holes in this government strategy. And it shows decades, just years of people making decisions, using education as a political football and making decisions about education without speaking to the profession.
Absolutely. I don't know the last time we had a education secretary who was a teacher. So that's a really interesting point. So just to move on slightly, when I was reading through the General Secretary race and you and your competitor Daniel, you've been described by some as a moderate. What do you take that to mean?
I think it's a really weird word. It's not a word that I use to describe myself. My politics, my music sense, my trade union activism. And I spoke to the journalist who used that word and said, I can't believe you used the moderate word. But what I think people interpret it as is that I am maybe moderate in my communication. I listen. I will listen and seek out. I will take time in making strategic decisions. I will make sure that, being part of a general secretary or even deputy general secretary is part of the leadership of our trade union movement. You have to make difficult decisions. We are a huge organisation, 450,000 members and growing. We've got 500 staff. We've got a turnover of 65 million. It's a large organisation, and you have to be able to make difficult decisions and stand by them and be held accountable for them. And if that saying that I am prepared to do those things and make difficult decisions, but take and seek advice where I need it from the right people, and stand by those decisions and be held accountable, if that makes me moderate, then I'm very happy to have that label.
No, that's an interesting defence because of the idea of sort of moderation, because trade unionism is traditionally seen as sort of a refuge of the left. So to hear those is quite an interesting approach. So just a couple of more questions before we wrap up. If you were Education Secretary for the day, I know it's a cheesy question, probably one you get quite a lot, but if you were Education Secretary for the day, what would you do and why?
I would two things. I would bring back educational maintenance allowance because it gave young people dignity in post-16 education. It enabled them to get to school or college and buy toiletries and paper and things like that. It gave them pride. But I would also raise the age of, increase the age of play-based education. So I would ensure that we weren't starting our formal education until much later. We've lost so many elements of play in primary education. I think that's really important because play isn't just about making friendships. It's about experimenting. It's about trying things out. It's about losing, failing, solving problems. And I think that's a really important, skill for our young people to have. And you see that through our secondary curriculum, where we've lost, so much drama and art and, experiments in our science curriculum, that I would ensure that there was play and joy in education.
Fantastic. And finally, if you weren't a teacher, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, before I would definitely be a trade unionist. I think my ideal job many years ago was to be head of the Professional Footballers Association.
Fair enough. Jock, I was not expecting that as a response. Head of the Professional Footballers Organisation. Fair enough, is all I can really say there. Right, let's finish on this note. Obviously, you're running for General Secretary of the National Education Union. What's your sort of 2-minute pitch to members who might be listening?
My 2-minute pitch is, what I really want members to do is to vote. I think it's really important that the person that is the leader of the National Education Union has a mandate from our working members in every school, in every college, in every district, in every area of the country. I'm absolutely honoured to have got support from members from England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and in every sector of education. It is vitally important that our trade union remains the voice of those people working in all areas of education, and I believe I'm the candidate to do that. I've got good leadership skills. I am, well versed of taking on Julia Hartley-Brewer or Melanie Phillips in the press, and I will be the voice for all of our profession.
Fantastic. Thank you, Niamh, so much for coming on and giving us your afternoon on a Saturday. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully we will all speak soon.
Thank you very much.
That was Niamh Sweeney, candidate for General Secretary of the National Education Union and current Deputy General Secretary of the National Education Union, covering everything from subject specialism and the teacher retention crisis to government education strategy, why it's failing teachers at the moment, actually tackling the myths around why she's been described as a moderate, actually saying she's a listening leader rather than someone who's necessarily politically moderate. What she would do if she was Education Secretary today, and being head of the Professional Football Association. An idea I wasn't actually expecting as an answer. That is all for today. Next week, we're going to try and have Daniel Kabide who is the other candidate for General Secretary of the National Education Union, who will again be a friendly interview talking about his experiences, what makes him the best candidate for the job. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the weekend and great week at school on Monday, guys. Cheers. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.